Привіт. I'm Chuck Olenek. I'm a Ukrainian-American who was baptized with the name Yaroslav, which is also the name I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. I used to teach history and I used to dress for the time period in class. So when I retired, I kind of repurposed myself and I started doing these videos in order to, I guess, feel like I'm still teaching, and also maybe to give a starting place for people that might be interested in doing research on, Eastern European and Slavic folklore and mythology and history, and that this might be a jumping off point for further research for persona development. So I've been doing these videos and posting them up on my channel, which, by the way, if you subscribe, that'd be really cool. And right now I'm kind of taking a look at different rulers in the history of Kyiv and Rus. And I'm doing this video about Volodymyr. This is mostly about Prince Volodymyr Sviatoslavich the Great, Prince of Kyiv, eventually canonized by the Eastern Orthodox Church as Saint Volodymyr. But it's also about his brothers, Yaropolk I and Oleg, who were his elders and had a different mother, Predslava. They too were sons of Sviatoslav I, who was also called Korobry, the Brave, or Zavoynik, the Conqueror, who ruled for 10 years before being ambushed and killed by the Pechenegs, who took his head and made a cup out of his skull. After the death of his mother, who would later be known as Saint Olga, Sviatoslav consolidated his control of Kyiv and Rus and appointed his sons as vice-regents. Yaropolk received Kyiv, Oleg was in the Drevelian lands, and Volodymyr, later the Great, was in Novgorod the Great. Due to the abrupt death of Sviatoslav and his skull being turned into a chalice, Sviatoslav's conquests, for the most part, they weren't consolidated into a fully functioning empire, and his failure to establish a stable succession, that's going to lead to a war between the three sons. So a war's going to break out at first between his legitimate sons in 977, when Oleg Sviatoslavich murders the son of Yaropolk Sviatoslavich's voivod, a man named Svinold, and that's going to trigger the war. Yaropolk killed Oleg in a battle near Ovrush and thus gained control of the Drevelian lands and territories and became the sole ruler of Rus. Volodymyr sees the writing on the wall. He flees Novgorod because he doesn't want to end up the same way Oleg did. And he goes to Norway. And with the help of a relative, Håkon Sigurdsson, ruler of Norway, he's going to try to collect as many Varangians as he can to help assist him in recovering Novgorod from Yaropolk. On his return the next year, Volodymyr marched against Yaropolk. On his way to Kyiv, he sent ambassadors to Rogvolod, the Prince of Polotsk, to sue for the hand of his daughter Rogneda. Well, Rogneda is a high-born princess, and she refuses to affiance herself to the son of Malusha, a woman of, one source says of indeterminate origins, and another source says a bondswoman. Besides, she's already betrothed to Yaropolk. So Volodymyr ends up attacking Polotsk, takes Rogneda by force, puts her parents to the sword. Polotsk was a key fortress on the way to Kyiv, and capturing Polotsk and Smolensk facilitated the taking of Kyiv in 978, where Volodymyr slew Yaropolk by treachery and was proclaimed knyaz, or prince, of all Kievan Rus, and married Yaropolk's Greek widow. All right, so now with Volodymyr in charge, the Varangian period of Eastern Slavic history, that's done. That's over. And now we're moving into the Christian period. He's not a Christian yet, but we're moving into that. So over the next 35 years, Volodymyr is expanding the borders of Kievan Rus, and he turns it into one of the most powerful states in Europe. And he is fighting wars all over the place. He takes land from Poland. He wages successful wars that end up gaining him access to the Baltic. And he ends up uniting a lot of Eastern Slavic tribes and divides his realm into lands and installs his sons or viceroys to govern these lands and dispense princely justice and collect tribute. In 985, he defeated the Khazars and the Bulgars, and so the eastern frontier is pretty secure, and now he's going to start devoting a lot of attention to defending his southern borders against the nomadic Pechenegs and also the Cherniklobluki, or the Black Hats. So Volodymyr had lines of fortifications built towards the south, and he had founded fortified towns that were joined by like from 500 miles to over 600 miles of ditches and earthen ramparts that were topped by wooden walls, and they were called the Zmei Valley, or the Snake Ramparts. Sometimes they were called the Polovetsky Ramparts. And in places, they were 20 feet tall, 80 feet thick, and were closely linked to the fortresses that were built along rivers, and you can see a lot of that stuff on the map. But then you take a look at how this was constructed, and this wasn't just simply, okay, they dug a ditch and then they put some logs on top. They dug down in and buried a bunch of the structures to make it more stable. That's not going to be enough. Volodymyr also has the old defenses of Kyiv leveled to the ground and new, much more formidable ones raised to encircle an enlarged area. The new fortified center, that was called Volodymyr's City, and that was surrounded by ramparts that were 50 feet high and 30 to 40 feet thick at the base. And they were topped with whitewashed log walls. There were 4 gates. Some were made of stone and brick, like the St. Sophia Gate that you see. Slavs were considered polytheistic, all right? Bunch of different gods and goddesses. And Prince Volodymyr, or Vladimir, who was Grand Prince at Kyiv, he ends up becoming a Christian. But there's the story that is the one that's out there for popular consumption. Then there's one where you kind of have to dig a bit. And the first story is Volodymyr is deciding which way he wants to go because he wants to pick a new religion for his people. Never mind that he already has a temple on Starokivska Hill, which is dedicated to a number of gods and a goddess. Now, he's going to pick a faith for his people, and he has emissaries brought to him who are offering Judaism as a choice, and Islam as a choice, and Christianity as a choice. And the story goes that he found out that, well, if you're going to be Jewish, you're not going to be eating pork. It's like, oh, that's not acceptable. We really like pork. We raise pigs. And that he found out that with Islam, you weren't supposed to drink, and there was a big uproar about that. Said, oh, my people really like to drink, so that's out. And Christianity was the one that was settled on. Okay, cool story, bro. But there's something that's a little closer to reality, and that was Volodymyr wants to marry the sister of the emperor in Constantinople. And this is a big deal. This is a great political connection. Constantinople, which also happens to be the seat of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And the emperor's sister is like, I'm not marrying a pagan. So Volodymyr converts. And he is baptized. And then what he ends up doing is, according to the story, he chases his people, herds them all into the Dnipro River. They get one mass baptism. Okay, boom, you're all Christians now. Oh, wait, we've got these pagan idols that are up on the hill. And there was this temple that had these idols there, and they were dedicated to Perun, who is the god of thunder and war and justice, and he was a god that was really favored by members of the prince's druzhina, his military retinue. And there was Trebog, and there was Dajbog, and there was Mokosh, the goddess, and Horus, and Simarhil. And he orders that the idols be taken down and they be beaten with rods to show how they have been cast aside, and then they get dumped in the mighty Dnipro River. A little sidebar. There's a Ukrainian proverb that says the wooden god dries out, which kind of hints at paganism's return. Volodymyr is building numerous churches. He's establishing schools. He is introducing Byzantine law code into his territories, but he's going to reform some of the harsher elements. He's going to form a great council out of his boyars, and he's going to set his 12 sons over his subject principalities. The economy is doing well, and he's minting coins, regulating foreign affairs with other countries such as trade, bringing in Greek wines and Baghdad spices and Arabian horses for the markets in Kyiv. Towards the end of Volodymyr's life, his sons, Sviatopolk, later called the Accursed or Accursed, and Yaroslav the Wise of Novgorod challenged his rule. Yaroslav stopped paying tribute, and first Volodymyr attacked and defeated Sviatopolk and put him in his place, and he decided to chastise the insolence of his son Yaroslav and began gathering troops against him. And he was in the process of rebuilding roads and bridges because he really wanted to slap his son around, but he ended up falling ill. And when he passed, he was initially buried at one of the churches he had founded. Later, his body was divided up and various parts were sent to different churches all over his realm, and those parts were venerated as relics. And he'll later be made a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church. So one of the legacies of Volodymyr is that in the folk tales, especially the tales about the Bogatyri, the heroes, the ones that are centered in Kyiv, there were elements of this Volodymyr and Volodymyr Monomach, and they were merged into one that was called Volodymyr Bright Sun or Volodymyr Red Sun, and he becomes the Slavic version of King Arthur. And I'll get into some of those other stories or revisit some of those stories. But the next batch of historical figures we're going to take a look at, we're going to take a look at who succeeds Volodymyr. I hope you stick with me. Do побачення.